We're all aware that gas prices are surging across the country. But what else is this affecting? According to the Washington Post, airlines are cutting flights, truckers are adding fuel surcharges, and businesses are hiking prices to make ends meet.
And as Republicans point the finger at President Biden for worsening inflation, the administration has gone all in on blaming Putin for America's economy. Here's Biden on Friday.
Make no mistake, inflation is largely the fault of Putin. I love, the Republicans saying it's Biden's gas pipeline. Biden said he's going to stop the Keystone pipeline, and I did. And that's the reason prices went up. Folks, let's get something straight here. The Keystone pipeline was 2 years away and had been 2% finished. Give me a break.
So deputy editor at Newsweek, Batya-Ungar Sargon, joins us now to discuss. And so, Batya, I think there's all sorts of disrespect toward working people going on around here, because to tell them that actually it was the Keystone XL pipeline that is driving up your gas prices is also a lie. So I guess we're gauging who's lying more to people. What's been your response to how we can start with Democrats, how they've handled this?
Look, I think that a lot of what passes for leftist liberal culture today is essentially economic privilege masquerading as morality. You saw this with the COVID lockdowns. People who could afford to work from home from white-collar jobs dressed that up as some sort of moral high ground. You saw it with defund the police. People who live in safe neighborhoods who never need the police were able to dress up that economic privilege as morality. You see it with a lot of the environmentalism, because yes, the Keystone pipeline, that would have been 14,000 union jobs that got wiped off the map in, the stroke of a pen. And now you're seeing it with, gas prices. Inflation started long before this war. And essentially what liberal elites have done is found a way to blame inflation on working class Americans who can't afford it, who can't afford these gas prices. Now they're saying, oh, you don't care enough about Ukraine, right? It's again this move of taking economic privilege, people who can afford to pay more for gas, people who drive electric cars, right? And dressing that up as morality at the expense of the working class.
Right, and it's that kind of attitude that the liberal elites have where they're saying, you have to, I'm sacrificing. We got to sacrifice. But sacrifice doesn't mean as much coming from you as it means to people who, when they fill up, and gas costs as much as it does right now, that makes a meaningful difference to them because maybe they have less money for food or for housing or for something else.
It is absolutely maddening to hear millionaires saying, we are in this together. We need to sacrifice. Who's we? You are not in a we with a struggling working class who's making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, who can't afford to pay $6, $7, a gallon for gas. That means they're going to have to choose between taking their kid to soccer practice and going to church on Sunday, right? There's no we there. And yet that imposition of economic privilege as morality, getting high off of being rich and acting like that makes you a better person. So much of liberal culture is caught up in that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of celebrities that have been pushing this. I think Tom Hanks was one, which was kind of disappointing to see. And there have been a number of rich celebrities coming out being like, well, this is our duty, because we're at war, which we're not even at war. But also the mainstream media has been pushing this, as you've been mentioning, about this, oh, well, you'll pay more because it's helping the people of Ukraine. Bette Midler is another one. She tweeted out this photo of a Ukrainian toddler and said, I'll happily pay more gas for her. And you actually talked about this when you were on Bill Maher's show, so let's take a listen to that.
This is class warfare masquerading as vanity morals. It's the morals of the elites, and who has to pay the price? It's the working class. It's the guy. It's on the front. They're going to buy electric cars. It's like the let them eat cake of 2020, right? Let them drive electric cars, right?
Yeah, I mean, Batya, really good points here. It's interesting to see how inflation has clearly been increasing at a rapid rate for months now, months and months and months. And now suddenly there's an excuse, and it's Ukraine, it's Russia, right? Russia's the problem. Why this month, or I think February was 7.9% inflation. The month before it was 7.5%. And it's just gone up and up and up and up. And it was even before there was actually a war going on. Do you think because I'm a little suspicious. Do you think that one of the reasons why we're even pushing Ukraine to continue battling Russia rather than negotiate with their nuclear neighbor, rather than saying you guys need to go to the table, because it is not a good idea to be enemies with a country right up on your border that has nukes? Do you think that we're kind of pushing this a little bit in order to have this excuse so that the Biden administration can say, well, it's not, once they realized it wasn't transitory inflation, it's not whatever it is the problem that really is, but it's instead Putin's problem?
So I don't think that that's the case, because I think that Biden has shown a lot of willpower standing up to the kind of elites that are trying to get him to escalate even further. So I totally agree with you that we have not been pushing negotiations enough. President Zelensky last week already said that he would be willing to give up his request to join NATO, which was essentially Putin's #1 reason for entering this war, this horrible war, inexcusable, but that was the reason for it. And that was something that he has stated very explicitly is the main thing that would make him stop the war. So I don't think we have been doing enough to convince the two sides to come together, especially given how little distance there is now between them and how well the negotiations are going at this late stage. At the same time, there's so much pressure from American elites on both sides of the political aisle to escalate, escalate, escalate. And I have been actually very impressed with how Biden has resisted that. So I think that I see why you would make that argument, but I don't see it that way. What I do think is happening is it's become very, very clear that the environmental causes at stake here are in deep tension with the working class. Now, that doesn't mean that environmentalism isn't important. It doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening and isn't something that we have to really do our best to take care of and to mitigate. But the Green New Deal, a lot of the stuff bound up in the environmental lobby is coming at the expense of the working class, both in terms of jobs and in terms of energy prices and in terms of just you look at a place like California that has so much of that, so much in terms of environmentalism, and also is the most economically unequal state in the union. And I think that that's what's coming out here is that tension, and that, the left needs a new playbook, because we have to admit that that tension is there and find a way to deal with both sides of that.
And so Batya, I've written about this a bunch too. I agree with you in a significant portion of your analysis that the upper middle class being so dominant within the Democratic Party now is creating a real tension between that element of the party and its traditional working class roots. And so you do end up getting these cultural values, masquerading as what you're talking about. But I also think that you get on the right, and we shouldn't let them off the hook either, that the right kind of is engaging in class warfare and masquerading it as support and love for the working class. And I think the gas prices situation is a perfect example. They have spent 30, 40 years vociferously fighting any shift away from fossil fuels, and so foisting onto the working class this system that in order for you to get to your job, in order for you to get to church, to get to softball, to get to soccer, you've got to basically light on fire something that we're pulling out of the ground. And they have fought tooth and nail to move away from that, with people saying, look, this is, forget climate change, and even forget national security. This is incredibly unstable. You're going to see wild fluctuations. We saw gas hitting $4 a gallon in 2008. And the response from the right was drill, baby, drill. So at some point, they're putting the working class at the mercy of OPEC and at the global energy markets, fighting against moving to a more sustainable and more stable system, and then saying that it's actually they're doing it for their own benefit. So isn't there some class warfare going on the right too, that it's masquerading as working class values?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, the working class has been abandoned by both sides for many, many decades now. And I don't want to claim that, the right is, I think that you are seeing right now their side and their position is more consistent with what I would consider to be a pro-working class agenda. But I don't know that that's, inherently, because of anything that they've done historically. It's just right now they are speaking up on behalf of the things that seem to me like would be in the interest of the working class. But of course, historically, certainly the right has been the side of the rich. And whether or not we're really seeing a shift there, I don't know. I mean, certainly there are some people who seem to be trying to make good on this sort of rhetoric. But whether that's going to be something that sticks, time will tell.
Well, Trump weighed in on the fiasco and blamed progressives for Biden's unwillingness to increase oil production in the U.S.
The entire world is laughing at the United States. This is to be the most pathetic spectacle that anyone's seen. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. And Elon Musk, who's a guy that I like and respect, friend of mine, he runs an electric car company, is calling for Biden to increase oil and gas production. But Biden won't do it because he does not have the will to stand up to AOC.
Yeah, he just has such a way about him.
We call her AOC. He came up with that. Nice if we lived in a world where Biden was afraid to stand up to AOC. But this is also what I'm talking about when it comes to this fundamental lack of respect for working people. Like the idea that we're at like max production. Like we're producing as much domestic energy now as we have been, for years. And the idea that laying down the Keystone Pipeline and green lighting that and then exporting that is going to do something about gas prices is just a lie. Gas prices are significantly controlled by OPEC. And then when you have an energy shock like Russia invades Ukraine, that's an additional shock. So at what point is the working class going to say, you know what, we don't want to be lied to by either side here?
I mean, I do have to say, I think that Trump is right in this case. When you just look at when the prices started to really rise with gas, it certainly was, around the time of the election when it was clear to, big oil that there was a new sheriff in town. I don't know that if necessarily if they were still producing.
OPEC Plus, which includes Russia, came to a new agreement that reduced production. Trump does deserve credit in this sense. He pushed to get more production, to get prices down, and OPEC complied. But OPEC complied because OPEC is run by Saudi Arabia, and Trump was doing all sorts of deals with Saudi Arabia, some above the table, some under the table, and also was overlooking the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and had a very good relationship with Saudi Arabia. And so Saudi Arabia was, whenever Trump asked to do something on production, whether it was reduce it during COVID, increase it around the election, he was willing to, MBS was willing to do that. So it is true that there's some connection between Biden being in the White House and gas prices, but that's because of OPEC.
Right, but again, isn't that again the same? We're back to the same thing. Like, sure, Jamal Khashoggi's murder was horrific, right? And yes, you can imagine a world where, like Putin's horrific invasion of Ukraine, we say, look, we can't stand for this, and we're willing to put, our dollars, into that, and say, look, we're not going to negotiate with people who do things like that. But again, that is selling out the working class at the gas pump in order to have some sort of moral high ground. And Trump didn't feel that was worth it. And I think he's right. Like, at some point, isn't that again going to be, how much are we willing to sell out the working class to feel good about ourselves, about countries that we can't change? A place like Saudi Arabia.
For 80% of the public, which is practically unanimous, you can't get 80% of people saying they like puppies in polls. 80% of the public is saying that they actually agree with the idea that we should stop taking Russian oil as a way to punish Russia, and that they'd be willing to pay more. So that includes massive.
There's two polls. Two polls, right? One said 80%. Yes, they'd be.
Right.
We
and then
should stop
three and five say they would pay more, right?
3 and 5 said that they would pay more. Yes, we're going to check in on them again in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, when it goes up to $7, $8, right? I think you're raising really important points, Ryan. I do. But at the end of the day, when I think about where are America's best interests and where are the interests of the Ukrainian people, it's in a de-escalation, it's in a recognition of, maybe our interests and even Zelensky's interests don't align with the really important, beautiful rhetoric that's coming out of his office, and that what we should be doing is really encouraging, an end to this, both on behalf of Ukraine's civilians and on behalf of our own working class.
Mm-hmm. My sense is that most people are willing to suffer some in the short term in the hopes that it will bring a quick end to this conflict, which is different from a sort of permanent not taking Russian oil to make a moral statement, driving up prices forever. I think that is not willing. I think people are willing to try it out for a short term because we're just trying to apply the pressure right now to end this, not as like a long-term regime change or moral stance. But
and just to be clear about the Trump relationship with the Middle East, so Jared Kushner went to the country of Qatar and shook them down. His real estate company shook them down for a massive bailout of his own private real estate debacle that he had gotten himself into. Qatar turned that company down, said, no, we're not giving you any money. Saudi Arabia and the UAE then blockaded Qatar, which has a base of 10,000 troops, American troops in Qatar. They were close to launching an invasion of Qatar with our American troops in the country. Kushner intervened, basically got Rex Tillerson fired because Rex Tillerson was like, wait a minute, we don't want to blockade these countries. What's going on? Why are we getting involved in this private kind of real estate deal that's going on here? And so Kushner ended up siding with MBS and siding with the UAE in this dispute with Qatar, which may have also been related to his own personal real estate dealings. And so this is all kind of corporate corruption. It's all personal corruption. It involves the surveillance technology that's moving in and out of Israel to Saudi Arabia, to the UAE, and around the world. And Kushner and Trump were willing to say, that's all fine. We're cool with doing this. And in exchange, Kushner has since gotten tons of money from Saudi Arabia for his own private equity fund. And also as a result, MBS was kind of willing to do whatever Trump asked on gas prices. You can say that that's good for the working class because it did push down gas prices, but it doesn't sound like a sustainable foreign policy or anything that kind of we'd want to endorse long term.
No, but that's almost making the argument for local drilling in our own country, becoming
But we're already
independent,
drilling everywhere.
But even more so, becoming more independent and saying we're not going to buy.
It's Wall Street that
doesn't.
This is the other key point. It's Wall Street that doesn't want to fund the drilling in the United States. There are tons of leases that are just sitting there because they're just not profitable for a lot of complicated reasons.
Yeah, we've got to go. But Batya, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on. Very informative. So thank you, and great job on Bill Maher's show. That was really nice watching you there. Really cool.
Thanks.
All right, we do have an update on WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. That is coming up next.